Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you are the generation of Pluto in Scorpio. Now, I looked at a number of websites to get the exact years, and this should be a no-brainer. But sure enough, like a lot of things with astrology, you have different sites saying different things. In general, I would say 1983 to 1995, although I saw one that said 96. But I saw more that said the end of it was 95. Now, what happens is that when you have a transit of a particular sign, especially these generational planets, which Pluto is, they do retrograde even when they go into a new sign, and then they might only go to 0 degrees or 1 degree, and then they go back and they go in the prior sign. So they may spend, who knows, maybe several months in the sign that they just came out of, simply because the planet went retrograde. And Pluto goes retrograde every year for, I think, like 5 months or something. So it's probably, it could be 96, but I'm not even gonna go back there and try to find that out. So I said it's a generational planet, and that is literally the case. What we're talking about is a 15-year span. I saw one of these sites say something about 21 years. I'm like thinking, what? Are you kidding me? No. 15 years for Pluto. I think it's about 15 for Neptune. And in this particular case, Pluto and Scorpio, it looks like it was a little bit less than 15, that it was around 12 to 13 years. But that is still considered generational. Uranus is much less. It is an outer planet, Uranus, but it's not personal to us as individuals. We look at the house that it's in to personalize it more. But really, what we're looking at is the collective. People who are born in certain time spans, they're going to have certain characteristics in common. But this is going to be very broad over like a decade and a half of people that are born under the same sign of Pluto. And this happens to dovetail very close to the millennials. There are a couple of years that are not covered, like 2 or 3. Before 1993, I saw one site that said that the millennials began in 1981. And then if you want to look at 1996, I think that's the other side of things. But it really does go, even one site said that Pluto stays into Scorpio until 1996. So it really covers a lot of millennials, or I guess also called Generation Y individuals. And another thing that I found interesting was somebody was talking about 9/11. I was saying, why are they talking about 9/11, which happened in 2001? When that's past the years of this generation. And then I realized that, because I was reading what a site said was, they said, you witnessed 9/11 on TV and Saddam Hussein and all these things. And what they were trying to say was that there were these, collective traumas that happened that kind of shaped that generation. And is that true? Is that different than prior generations? I was just reading about Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby shooting him live on television. And of course, you could just say JFK. That was a trauma in the early 60s. And that wasn't Pluto and Scorpio. But I think that what we can say about this generation is that it's pretty all pervasive. And what I mean by that is that even forget about the years when this generation was growing up, past even like 1995. Just within the years that these people were being born, there were events happening around them that a lot of times they may not have been aware of on a conscious level, because they were, in some cases not even born yet, or they were infants, young children, just not aware of it. When I, as an older person, can look at those years and say, oh yeah, I can tell you what was happening then. And that was the vibe around uh, the, that was what was facing them, just even coming into this third dimensional reality. One of the first things that I would say is that the scorpionic influence is really about what makes people tick. And I find that a lot of people who now, like even the younger ones who were born in 1995 or 96, how old would they be? They'd be like 26 years old right now, or 27 actually, 26 or 27 at the moment. Those are the younger ones, but the ones who are older can even be pushing 40, because if they were born in like 83, they'd be like in their late 30s. So in that age range, I get a lot of people commenting on my videos. Even clients that I've had have been in that age range as well. And I think one of the reasons why is that they have Pluto and Scorpio, because I tend to be interested in the issues that Scorpio represents, like the shadow self, and kind of the transformational or alchemic aspects to life, rather than just the predictive side of astrology. I like evolutionary astrology, and that really is looking at your chart and seeing like what is there in terms of what you can do to step into your highest version of yourself and transform yourself. And we do have a society that pushes transformation, but a lot of times it's coming from this, I think, an inherent desire to appeal to other people, to fit in. It's, even if they cloak it in some new agey terms sometimes, I still think that at the heart of it all, it's about fitting in more. And this is not about that. And when you get somebody who has those elements, there's a very strong energy field around them. Like anybody who's a Scorpio or has contacts to Pluto in their chart or eighth house placements, they will tend to be forces to reckon with in one way or the other, because it's not really about rebellion. It's about refusal to compromise with anybody who is trying to be fake. There's just obviously we use the word intensity to describe Scorpios or people that have a strong Scorpio influence. So Pluto and Scorpio people will tend to be intense and attracted to, I wouldn't say the darker side of life, but definitely what lies beneath. And one of the things that I think that this generation has really been attracted to a lot of times is truth. And what I mean by that is when we talk about politically and just in every area of life, we talk about whistleblowers and truthers, people who are like citizen journalists who are digging for um, what is really the story, not what is the propaganda. I see so many younger people who are truthers, and that, a lot of people might think that that is some kind of a political affiliation, and it's not. I see a lot of people like that who have no connection, I'm talking about in America, to either political party. They just want to um, expose all of the scandals, everything that's really going on behind the scenes. And so, suffice it to say, this generation can't really have the wool pulled over them unless, obviously there can be other things going on in a person's chart that overrides that. Um, Now, just what I was referring to before is I was talking about what was happening in our society from the early 80s until the mid 90s, when this generation was being born. One of the first things I can say is that gangs were becoming very much a part of our life. Gangs are the underworld, and that is what Scorpio represents. It's funny that or Pluto, and one thing I have to say is that Pluto is one of the rulers of Scorpio. I should have said that at the beginning, because I figured a lot of people know that. Mars is the other ruler, but Pluto is really associated with Scorpio because, it was discovered more recently, and so it's more of a recent connection, but it really does go along with what we think about Scorpio people, so it's perfect. Or people that have a strong influence like that. And so the thing about, and I didn't see them mention anything about this, but yes, I mean, this was a big thing. And there are, of course, different types of black market or things like that that are being sold with gang. Well, I should say organized crime too in general. Gangs is a form of organized crime, but just organized crime in general. And the crack epidemic began not too long after this generation started being born. So I would say like around 1985, 86. And even the CIA was accused of being the ones that were putting that in the community. So that is something that is very interesting, because that um, is what we would call the shadow government. So all of these kinds of the hidden hand, they call the people that are pulling um, the strings behind the scenes. And this is when it really came out. And even the thing about conspiracy theories. I don't know if Coast to Coast is still on radio, but I used to listen to that radio show, and I think I started in the 90s and it was on late at night. It might still be on. But that was all about like kind of supernatural and also but conspiracies. And that's when these things kind of began to show up. Um, I mean, I wasn't exposed to them altogether, but like even the talk shows that existed in the 80s, they began to talk about taboo subjects. They were quite serious. Oprah began during this time period, actually, right at the beginning of this time period. I remember seeing her for the first time, and she would have, but she wasn't the only one. These talk shows would have families come on and talk about some of these issues, satanic ritual abuse in the late 80s. That became a big story. And it's one of those things that then it was kind of supposedly debunked. But again, it brought it to the surface. Now, sometimes, people can do damage control and try to kind of push back on it. But these are the things that want to kind of come up for people to be aware of, and that can plant seeds in people. This generation also has had to deal with, in addition to death in the form of some of the crime, there was a lot of, because of gangs, there were a lot. It's probably a lot worse than it is now. I heard that the most murders, because I live outside of Chicago, and that's always one of the areas that they always talk about, but they were saying in the 70s it was like twice as many murders. But there were a lot of high profile kinds of deaths that occurred. And this was when we still had public housing, like the projects and things like that, going into the 90s, from the 80s into the 90s. There's a lot here, because there was a lot of decimating of factories in the 80s, and sending jobs overseas, so the economic situation was restructured. But see, this is a very interesting thing, because Pluto is about power, and when you have it's also about other people's money. So this was the 80s, especially in the last half of the 80s. But that movie Wall Street, really, that was when Wall Street became a big deal. Before that, people put their money in savings accounts. And I remember having a passbook when I was a kid in the 70s, and it had like 5% interest. And then in the 80s, they switched it over to Wall Street. So people had to pretty much gamble. Instead of having that secure money in the bank with a higher interest, where they didn't have to worry about growth, because that would have happened. 5% isn't that much, but it's better than point whatever, like 0.5% or 1% if you're really lucky. So they started having people play the stock market, and that's other people's money. That's that's definitely riskier. And that is the power structure changing, where people had to deal with other people's money in one way or another. When you have your own money that you put in the bank, then whatever you are doing with that money, that's it. But you can't control what a stock does. So the issue of controlling money came up in various ways, and like I said, with jobs being sent to other countries, and I'm speaking of the United States specifically. I can't speak to people from other countries, but I would love to hear it if some people remember during this time period things that happened in their country. I'd love to hear that. But there's like that restructuring and things like that. But that was really about power in general, because there was a lot of materialism that was kind of celebrated in the 80s during this time period. And so this idea of the more money you have, the more successful you are, and the more power you have within the society. And so people were trying to kind of show their status through all of that. And the truth is that this generation has had to deal with the economic challenges that I believe began after 9/11 and continued. And I think that I can only speak to United States, so I realize that for other countries you might have had other economic situations. But I think that even if you are from other countries, I think because United States is quite influential in terms of what happens here kind of ripples out to other countries, that it still might have affected you at some level. And right now we can see that humanity as a whole is going through a lot of the same things. And I'm recording this in 2022, so we had the global shutdown in 2020, and that was a traumatic thing. But one of the bright sides of that is that it brought the world together. It made people feel like they could put themselves in other people's shoes because we had a lot in common at that point. And so this generation of people that span the late 20s to late 30s, when I say late, I'm talking about you could be 26. So maybe I could say midish 20s to late 30s. This is the time period where career matters may be front and center for you, where you may be trying to establish yourself, and yet finding that the economy or the world at large is undergoing so much changes that you don't feel that you can do what you want to do. And that can be frustrating, and that can feel like confusing for some people, but I do believe that this generation has the ability to kind of transcend all of that, because you may know at a core level that you signed up for this, that you brought your A game, that you know how to navigate these turbulent waters, because you're kind of leading the way, your generation. And a lot of you may have extra, you know how ESP is, was it extra sensory perception? So you might have extrasensory perception. I don't know about exactly ESP, but you may have be very perceptive about human nature, including your own. And this can lead you into healing arts types of careers. Now, yes, on a more traditional level, you may be attracted to psychology, but some of you want to go beyond just the mainstream when it comes to transformation. You may be interested in uh, energy healing. You may be able to see that it's not just about one thing, that it's not just about dealing with emotions. It's also about transforming a person's mentality, the way that they perceive things. I've noticed in terms of the genders that there are men in their 30s who are still trying to find themselves, and their female counterparts may be, um, you know, well along in their careers. And I think one big reason for this is like with affirmative action, or whatever you want to call it, that hiring women was encouraged. And so the males ended up, so that power dynamic where the males were dominating in earlier generations, we have kind of like flipping the script, but it's still might be lopsided. So we might, be going to the other extreme, and that's something Scorpio is about, is extremes. Another thing that is really about Scorpio and Pluto is sexuality, and I didn't see anything mentioned about that, which is very odd. Um, but I think that the dark side of sexuality shows up here, and therefore, the proliferation of pornography, I think, is one of the big stories about this generation. And when I don't know if I've done Neptune in Scorpio, because that would also be like an earlier generation, but that's a little bit of a different influence. But all of these things, what happens is that, now that I think about it, I'm the generation of Neptune and Scorpio. So it's possible that some of the parents are from Neptune, the generation of Neptune and Scorpio, having children who have Pluto and Scorpio. And it's kind of a long storyline from Libra, the Neptune in Libra, how it goes to Neptune in Scorpio, because that's a totally different energy. And so with Pluto in Scorpio, there can be people in their 20s and in their 30s who have seen some of the more unsavory um, side of sex. And that can lend itself to all kinds of reactions to that, whether it is identifying with some of those things or rejecting it out of hand. And the key is always going to be transformation. And so that's what alchemy really is. It's taking something that is very base or very gross or very unrefined and making it into something that is very valuable. And I have been noticing a lot of the spiritual healing offerings that are based around issues involving like sexual trauma for women, the womb. I don't know if they call it womb trauma, but these things about how that people can regain innocence if they feel like they lost it somehow, and have a more wholesome kind of an attitude, whether it's about sex or life as a whole. Because again, this scorpionic influence is all about this idea that there is more to life than meets the eye. And so, as somebody who has the sun in Sagittarius, but I have the sun in the 8th house, I have the moon in conjunction with Pluto. It hasn't been until recently that I have realized how much I operate this way. And it didn't even occur to me that I'm always like, giving my partner the third degree and like really trying to get to the bottom of things. Like there's something that is not being said. There's something that it needs to be uncovered. And it was so second nature to me that I didn't even think about it until I started to do these videos. And I realized how much I was just engaging in that kind of behavior. And it's nothing inherently negative, But it can be, it can be perceived that way by other people because they will think that you are very suspicious of their motives. So this generation may be quite, may have a lot of trust issues in general because they have seen how these entities that um, prior generations, took at face value, were going to protect them, betrayed them. So obviously, the first one we can think about are politicians, but in every area, um, journalists, are we getting the truth in the news? Are we getting, in the medical field, in everything? Are we getting the truth, or is there something else going on? Is there a hidden agenda? And you may be looking at things with a jaundiced eye, but it's something that needs to be done because believing in the surface ain't cutting it. And you're leading the way, Generation Y. Sometimes I write WHY, Generation Y, because you may be questioning the value in some of these institutions. Like if we're not getting the truth about history, then why even bother? Or the truth about everything. So anyway, yeah, the kind of careers that you tend to gravitate towards are psychology or other types of maybe even like motivational, even like a life coach in some cases, because you want to help people transform their lives, but you might be interested in straight psychology, any kind of healing arts, and that can even be like hands-on, like massage therapy, obviously financial, um, being a stockbroker, something where you're dealing with other people's money, a politician. And I'm getting some of these from LibraRising.com because um, in terms of politician, I was watching this clairvoyant on YouTube the other day, and she was talking about how she majored in political science because she wanted to become a politician, perhaps. And I thought that was really odd because, but she wanted to reform society. And, I think she might be of this, yeah, she's part of this generation. Um, yeah, and a researcher, investigator. These are some of the things they mentioned sex worker, which is kind of funny. But that's true because really that's what I was talking about when I was talking about sex is that when we look at something like Pluto, you're taking that's where the alchemy comes in. Something like sex, and we're making it into something that is healing. I would also just say, in general, tantric yoga might be appealing to some people. Um, yeah, so anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.